All right, guys, so this video is a long time coming. It's a topic that I talk about a lot with the runners I coach and have been wanting to do a YouTube video about it. So here we are. This is all about the marathon taper, trying to answer all the questions that you could possibly have about the taper. So let's go ahead and get into these questions. And at the end, if I miss anything, of course, guys, go ahead and place that in the comments. And as always, I will answer to the best of my ability. So starting with the first question, what is the taper and what is the point? So the taper is the last phase of your marathon training cycle where you are going to reduce your mileage slowly over the course of that taper. Now the taper is what I always refer to when I have runners asking me, how in the heck am I going to run 26.2 miles at marathon pace when I'm not actually practicing that at all in my training, and when I'm actually doing mostly easy runs in my training? How does that translate? And it really all comes back to this concept of cumulative fatigue, which is what's happening and building all through the marathon training. And the taper phase allows you to basically get rid of that cumulative fatigue so that by the time race day rolls around, your body is feeling really ready and on, you're fully recovered, you are well rested, and those legs are fresh. Those are the things that you're going to need when you show up on race day, and doing the taper phase correctly is what's going to allow that to happen for you. So the main goal of the taper is that reduction in mileage, but there are some other things that you really want to focus on during this time as well. All right, so the next question, how long should the taper be? So I've actually seen some 4-week tapers, but I'm gonna tell you right off the bat that I think this is too long. Now, if you're already in a training plan that has you doing a 4-week taper and you're a beginner, don't change it, just go with it and see how that works out for you this time. And doing that first marathon is all about seeing how the pieces fit together, how that works, and then moving on to something different and improving for next time. But what I recommend is doing a 2 to 3 week taper. I've seen both work incredibly well, and in the end, it kind of comes down to the individual runner, what makes them unique and what level they are, and lots of different things. So the 3-week taper is obviously going to give you more of an opportunity, a longer period of time to reduce that mileage, whereas with a 2-week taper, it's much shorter. So that's the biggest difference. And when you're doing a 3-week taper, you're going to see that first week of volume reduction is pretty slight. It's really not going to be a huge difference. And so typically what I've done for myself and had success with is 3-week tapers. That's also what I typically schedule for my runners, although I have had situations where we are doing more of a 2-week taper. And again, that comes down to that unique situation. So if you're trying to decide right now, should it be 3 weeks? Should it be 2 weeks? Again, go back to your plan. If you've already chosen to plan and you're this far into it that you're actually going to be doing the taper really soon, keep trusting the process. Just keep going with the plan. I always say, find a good plan, do the research first, and then once you pick a plan, stick to it and do it. Otherwise, if you are self-coaching or you have more experience and you're trying to kind of do this on your own, I would say 3 weeks generally are best for someone towards the beginner end who hasn't had a lot of experience with a taper. If you've done a lot of tapers, you want to try out that 2-week taper and you know that you don't need a ton of time to recover, perhaps you're not prone to injury, you're younger, or just that's what you notice for yourself, then you would probably do best with a 2-week taper. If you're someone that goes absolutely nuts and crazy, which we'll talk about during this taper, perhaps a 2-week taper is better for you as well. So in the end, either a 2-week or 3-week taper is going to really set you up for success on race day as long as you approach it in the correct way. All right, next question. How much should I reduce the mileage volume during the taper? So because everyone's peak mileage is different when the taper phase hits, 35 on the very low end, maybe for a beginner marathon runner, 100 plus on the very high end of someone elite or very experienced, we want to think about reducing volume as a percentage. Now, I've heard people talk about, or coaches talk about, how this is kind of confusing. And it honestly is if you're being very specific. So just think about this more as a range, and it doesn't need to be exact. So just, kind of keeping them around those percentages is best. I'll give you kind of another way to look at it as we're going along. But I'm going to talk about a 3-week taper, what that's going to look like. So 3 weeks out, 2 weeks out, and 1 week out, what that volume mileage is going to look like. So Essentially, your taper phase begins as soon as you do your longest long run of the training cycle, or perhaps it matches your other longest long runs in the training cycle. And maybe you've had some marathon pace in there. It's like your hardest effort long run you've done all the way throughout your training cycle. And now it's time to reduce mileage. So starting from there, basically, as soon as that's done, the taper phase begins. So at 3 weeks out, as you're reducing volume after that, you want to think about 85 to 90% of your peak mileage week. So if that biggest week you had was 60 miles, then you're using that as your baseline to get these percentages from. So 85 to 90% of 60, that's what you're going to be doing in that 3 weeks out time period. And because it's not going to be a lot of mileage, if you want to look at it more from the standpoint of maybe even just taking off 1 mile from each of those runs so that you don't have to just change one run completely, that's one really easy way to just start tweaking it and moving it down the scale. All right, so 2 weeks out, you're reducing mileage by about 65 to 75% of that peak week. So again, you're going back to that 60-mile peak week and taking it down 65 to 75%. So it's going to be lower than the week that you had before, right? Again, you can continue on that same pattern of cutting out about a mile from each of your runs besides a long run during the week. That's a good way to do it. Or I would also recommend considering taking out 1 day completely. So up until 2 weeks out, I really recommend keeping your schedule the same. So if you've always run 5 days, continue to run 5 days until you get to 2 weeks out. Then if you want to take a day out completely and add in another rest day, this would be the perfect time to do that. So in which case now you're doing 4 days a week of running that week. Everyone's a little different. Some people go a little bit nuts when they can't be doing their runs every day. If that's you, you probably don't want to go that route. But if you're someone who really looks forward to the rest days, that's how I am, then it's totally fine to, take that down a notch and have another rest day, because this is the time where you're really prioritizing that rest and recovery. As for the long run, it's a little bit different. So let's say your peak long run was 20 miles. You can think about this from a percentage standpoint as opposed to just taking it out down a notch a mile. I usually like to see 2 weeks out someone running 15 to 16 miles if their longest long run was 20. That typically works really well for most runners. All right, now at 1 week out, reduce that volume from your max peak week about 40 to 60%. Now, I know that's a very wide range, and I'm doing that on purpose because essentially every runner is unique and what their needs are. And this is why, as a coach, I really like to take into consideration everything that's happened for that runner over the course of their training cycle. Were they injury prone? Because if that's the case, we want to be really, really careful not to overdo it this week. If they've had periods of overtraining, if they are, they've been feeling overwhelmed, this might be a good time to scale it back even a little bit more. Again, going back to those people who have a really hard time with the taper and they want to, keep doing more and more, then we want to make it so it's manageable for them, but still also reducing the volume by a lot, because we're going to talk about this soon, but you can absolutely mess up the taper by doing too much. Now, the important thing to remember here, guys, is you cannot build new fitness at this phase of your training, so do not try. Don't think, okay, I missed those few runs, I'm going to make up the mileage here. No, that's the worst way to go, so don't have that thought process at this time. And then as for that long run, that's exactly 1 week out from your marathon. I find that if 20 miles was your longest long run, 10 miles, that 50% of your longest long run works really, really well. So that's what I would recommend, or something very close to that. All right, here is a very big question I get. Should I still do my quality sessions during the taper phase? Now, when you're in that 3rd week, if you're doing a 3-week taper, absolutely, you should be doing a pretty strong quality session about 2.5 weeks. That's probably where your speed session is going to land, about 2.5 weeks out from your marathon. That's still a lot of time, and the perfect time to have just a really great speed session where you can still have some fitness and reap the benefits from that hard session that are going to show up on race day. So absolutely in that 1st week, kind of continue on with what you're doing, having one of those great quality sessions. Now, once we get into the 2 weeks out time frame, We're not going to be building new fitness there. It really takes at least 10 to 14 days for you to be taking on those benefits and absorbing those benefits from those quality sessions. So at this point in time, you really want to focus on just sharpening the knife, if you will, and having those legs feel efficient and ready to go. So this is a really good time to hone in on that marathon pace and that marathon pacing strategy. So something that I like to do, have runners do, is because I want them to negative split and I want them to go out easy, we replicate this in a speed session in that 2-week taper time frame. So maybe they're going to have that first mile of the speed portion is going to be their goal marathon pace plus 10 seconds. So we move into goal marathon pace, and then we're finishing faster with goal marathon pace minus 10, maybe even moving into half marathon pace or 10K pace at the end. So they get some of that extra element of speed. And then once you're in that last week, you want to be really careful. This is a great time to do something like a fartlek session. Again, honing in on that marathon pace. What's that going to look like on race day? Have your legs feel ready and have your body know exactly what that feels like. And then just getting some of that faster turnover with the 10K pace, fartleks, and strides is a great way to go as well. But you should not be doing any more mileage at this time for these quality sessions, still reducing that mileage. The intensity can be similar with cutting it down probably just a little bit, at least for the length of time. You're not going to be doing these long efforts at this hard pace because again, you can certainly do too much here. So err on the side of less when you think about that. All right, next big question I get is, will I lose fitness during the taper phase? Absolutely not, okay? You guys have to remember that this is why having a great marathon training cycle before that is so incredibly important, because your body is going to be ready to taper. You're gonna need that taper to actually be in peak fitness. This is why you'll often hear people call the taper phase peaking instead. You're basically allowing your body to finally reap all the benefits of the hard work that you've been putting it through this entire time, pushing to the absolute brink, your absolute potential, so that you can rest, recover, absorb all of that hard work so that it shows up on race day. And honestly, guys, it takes close to 2 weeks for you to lose fitness anyway. And that's really if you're doing like little to no running, okay? You're still going to be running a lot at this time. And even with a 3-week taper, you're not going to be changing your mileage a ton that 3 weeks out. Then once you get to those 2 weeks, you just need to remember you're still running here and you still have some intensity with that 1 to 2 speed sessions that you're putting in as well. And so you're not going to lose fitness during this time. You're reaching your peak fitness so that it will show up on race day, and you have to rest and recover and reduce mileage in order for that to happen. A really important one, how do I not go crazy during the taper phase? Now, I completely understand this one, guys, although I would say I'm someone who really looks forward to the taper. I typically don't have problems taking the rest day when they are prescribed, but I know that there are other people who really struggle, and the taper phase is very hard. And again, if that's you, perhaps the 2-week taper time is going to be a little bit better. So you'll hear people call this taper madness, taper crazies, taper tantrums. This phenomenon is very real. At this point, you're really going to question everything that you've put into action at this point, and you're not going to be able to do anything about it. So really worrying about it doesn't help. But I understand that that's easier said than done, right? But yeah, the questions go through your head like, did I run enough? Did I do my speed workouts correctly? Am I tapering appropriately? Am I losing fitness? Kind of like we talked about, right? And really you just feel like you're on an emotional roller coaster. You also might feel really flat during this time. You might feel sluggish and fatigued, and you're thinking, this is the opposite of what I want, right? And again, it's just your body really being ready to take in that recovery time and rest that you need so that it can reap the benefits of the hard effort. Just like how you would feel sluggish the day after a really hard effort, think about all those hard sessions, all that mileage for weeks and weeks and weeks, and you're finally letting your body have a break at this time. It's very normal to feel that way, and it's okay. So you just want to manage it as best you can, doing the mileage the best that you can, hitting those easy paces like you're supposed to. Don't be changing what you're being prescribed to do at this time. Just keep trusting the process. My best recommendations for filling the time here is do the things that you enjoy and are relaxing that you may have not had time previously in your training. Additionally, so that you will stress less about race day, because that's inevitable as well. This is the perfect time to really prepare everything, know all you're gonna do, if there's travel, what race day is gonna look like, your outfit, pack. Those are some of the best things that you can do to prepare and prepare your mind, and so that you will worry less, because the more prepared you are, the less stressed you're going to be about how it's gonna all come together. Next big question is, what should my nutrition look like during the taper, and should it change? So essentially, as you start the taper phase, the 3 weeks out, the 2 weeks out, really things are not going to look different from what you've been doing all along. And hopefully your nutrition has been high quality throughout your marathon training cycle. So that's what you want to keep it at. So thinking about having a balanced blend of those macronutrients, the carbohydrates, protein, and fat, all of which are going to allow you to have that fuel that you need for your runs throughout the taper, as well as that recovery too. Now, a week out from the marathon, things start to shift a little bit to where you want to change that ratio of those macronutrients and starting to have a higher and higher percentage of carbs throughout the week. So as you get to 1 to 2 days out from your marathon, this is where you're going to have about 80% of your intake be carbs. I know that sounds like a lot, but hopefully if you've been kind of adding a little bit more carbs day after day after day, then your body should be used to it and you should feel comfortable in doing so. So try to keep the focus on those really high quality carbohydrates that you've been having, hopefully throughout your marathon training cycle. Things like potatoes, rice, fruit, bread, oatmeal, anything that would fall into that category that's giving you that high carb intake that you need, that's also helping you feel your best. Now, I do want to tell you guys that it's actually very, very normal to gain a couple of pounds during this time. Don't worry. Now, definitely don't be getting on a scale at this time. That's probably one of the worst things that you could do, because then you're getting in your head about it. But honestly, it is actually better to be going into the marathon a little bit heavier than a little bit lighter, because you're going to need those carb stores and that energy to make it all the way through your marathon with the energy that you need. All right, big question here. Can I mess up the taper? Yes, you can absolutely mess up the taper by doing too much. And I have absolutely seen this happen with people being worried and questioning that they didn't do enough, and then trying to put in some extra workouts or mileage to make up for something that they missed, or just because they're having these anxieties or concerns. Don't do that. It's always better to be a little bit undertrained than overtrained. And if you think it's too much, it probably is. Remember all that cumulative fatigue that was so good during your training? It's not good right now. So that is the whole point of the taper, to not have that cumulative fatigue, so that you are super fresh, super focused. Your body is ready to roll for marathon race day. So make sure that you go into race day not having done too much during the taper, and you will be exactly where you need to be. All right, guys, so I know coaching isn't something that you're going to be needing right now if you are in the taper phase, because you just want to get to that finish line at this point. But if you find yourself wanting to have a coaching option on your next marathon training cycle, definitely check out my coaching page. See what I have available at the time that you are looking. It's always evolving. I will be adding things. And so definitely reach out if that is something that you're interested in, to see if we would be a good fit in working together. As always, guys, thanks for joining me, and I will catch you in the next video.